General quarters. All hands man your battle stations.
Welcome back to Wetsu, a Battleship New Jersey podcast where we explore naval history, leadership, and the people who have shaped both our Navy, New Jersey, and our nation. I'm Marshal Spevak, CEO of the Battleship New Jersey, and I'm proud to host Wetsu. Today's guest is someone who embodies the deep connection between our great state, maritime service, and national leadership. Rear Admiral Mark Buz Buzby, United States Navy retired, is a proud New Jerseyan whose career spans commands at sea, senior leadership ashore, and service at the highest levels of maritime policy. A career naval officer with over 34 years of experience and service, Admiral Busby's love for the water started at age 9, where he started to pilot vessels off the Jersey shore. He has an extensive background in maritime transportation and leadership, having served on the staffs of the 6th Fleet, U.S. Fleet Forces Command, OPNAV, and the Joint Staff. From October 2009 to March 2013, Admiral Buzby served as commander of Military Sealift Command. During his career, the Admiral commanded Destroyer USS Carney, DDG-64, Destroyer Squadron 31, the Surface Warfare Officer School Command, and Joint Task Force Guantanamo Bay. As a junior officer, he served on numerous classes of ships, primarily in operations and combat systems billets. While in command of the Carney, the ship received 2 Battle Efficiency Awards, the Navy Unit Commendation, and the USS Arizona Memorial Award as the most combat-ready ship in the U.S. Navy over a 2-year period. From 2017 to 2021, he served as the 19th United States Maritime Administrator, overseeing our nation's maritime service, merchant marine, and ready reserve. A native of the great city of Atlantic City, New Jersey, Admiral Buzby is a 1979 graduate of the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy at Kings Point. He also holds graduate degrees from the Joint Forces Staff College and holds master's degrees from the U.S. Naval War College and Salve Regina University. Admiral Buzby, it's a pleasure to welcome you to Wetsu. Thanks so much for being with us.
It is great to be on board with you, Marshal. Thank you.
You're a proud New Jerseyan. Your family has deep roots in the city of Atlantic City, as I mentioned. I was fortunate enough to spend over 5 years working in Atlantic City, and I know the history well. What was it like growing up in Atlantic City, the Atlantic County region? How did it shape you? And can you share a little bit about your own family history in South Jersey?
Sure. Yeah, I was born, raised in Atlantic City. Literally, my whole life revolved around the corner of Pacific Avenue and Michigan Avenue. Because Atlantic City Hospital was on one corner where I was born. The church that I was baptized in, St. Andrews, was on the other corner. And right next door was the Hotel Dennis, which my family owned for about 110 years. So my whole life was right there. And I grew up, I'd like to tell people my first breath of air in the hospital was salt air because it was a block away from the ocean. And I get antsy to this day if I get too far away from salt water. But yeah, growing up in Atlantic City back in the 60s, early 60s, it was undergoing a lot of change, but it was still a very family resort. And we would have families that would come back to the hotel every summer. And we got to really know some wonderful people there. And one of those people actually was my great uncle, Joel Boone. He and Aunt Helen would come every summer and stay for a month or so. And he was a Navy surgeon, retired as a vice admiral. And he had a very big influence on me early on. He, for whatever reason, took a liking to me and sort of began mentoring me at a very early age. And as I began learning more about him and his background, he was a pretty impressive guy. He had won the Medal of Honor while serving with the Marines in World War I, a fleet surgeon, or as a regimental surgeon with the 6th Marines. He had a couple of Silver Stars, 4 or 5 Purple Hearts, Quad Gear. He, at the time of his passing, and I think it still holds today, he was the most highly decorated medical officer in the Navy.
Wow.
I mean, he had a row of ribbons that went almost up to the seam of his blouse. But he used to tell me lots of stories about the Navy and his time. He was Halsey's 3rd Fleet medical officer.
Wow. Okay.
So very likely he was aboard,
Yeah,
Big J.
absolutely.
And of course, Halsey's chief of staff was Mick Carney.
Yes, we're going to get to
The
that.
namesake of my ship. And, there's a wonderful story that runs all back and through all that. But, yeah, growing up in Atlantic City, riding bicycles on the boardwalk, going on the beach, all that was just a wonderful way, but always focused out at sea, always looking out there, knowing that there was something out there for me.
Yeah. And you chose the path of going to the Merchant Marine Academy in Kings Point. How did you end up with that decision, and how did that prepare you for your your naval career?
Yeah, well, I went to Admiral Farragut Academy there in Pine Beach, New
Okay.
Jersey, for high school because I could not wait to get in uniform. I wanted to be in the Navy so bad I could taste it. So my mother and father were able to send me there. And so I got into uniform, my first set of dress blues when I was about 14 years old. Absolutely loved it. I ate that stuff up and just, it went from there. My sights were set on the Naval Academy. I knew I wanted to be a naval officer. I had visited the Naval Academy a bunch of times. I had already started memorizing all of the table salt and all of the stuff that plebes need to memorize, and then ended up not getting in. I was a first alternate, but I'd also applied to the Merchant Marine Academy, to SUNY Maritime, and also Coast Guard Academy because I knew I was going to serve at sea in some capacity. So when I didn't get in the Naval Academy, that was a major disappointment early in my life. And I had to stop and take stock. Okay, what is it that's really important here? What do you really want? Was it to go to the Naval Academy or was it to be a naval officer? And I soon realized that I could go to Merchant Marine Academy at Kings Point and I would graduate as a naval officer and also have a Coast Guard third mate license and also have a degree. So I went up to Kings Point. It was the best thing that ever happened to me, quite frankly. I mean, I got so much more out of that, more hands-on seamanship, ship handling, you name it, than I ever would have coming out of Annapolis. So, the good Lord steered me in that direction, and I was smart enough to go along for the ride.
Yeah, awesome. I didn't go and mention your entire assignment career, all the ships you served on. Although I will tell you, you did send me down the rabbit hole the other night, learning about hydrofoil ships from some of the ships you served on. But what lessons from early sea tours, some of your junior officer tours, kind of stayed with you throughout your career?
That's a really good question, Marshall. I have been asked to lecture on leadership a lot, as I've gotten along in my career. And one story I always tell about young leaders and young leadership is to make sure you're investing in your people and understand your people. Coming out of Kings Point, I was pretty competent in my skills and pretty competent in running things, machinery and systems, that sort of thing. Not as skilled in leading. I mean, I was the regimental commander at Kings Point. So, theoretically I was leading, but it was different when I was standing in front of my first division, our division, as the damage control assistant on that first ship. And I figured, well, I'm standing in front of a bunch of guys that are about my age. They're adults. They should be able to take care of themselves and know what they're doing, and not necessarily good assumptions.
Assuming you leaned on your chiefs and your LPOs.
I was very much blessed with a chief hull technician, a Vietnam vet, salty old guy from Missouri, and Chief Kimes, who was just a wonderful mentor and teacher to me. And he very quickly helped me understand that I owed something to my people. If I wanted them to get something done, I needed, as the leader, to remove the barriers, to ensure that they would be successful, to provide them with the training, provide them with the guidance, with the understanding of what our little piece of the mission was, so that my expectations for their performance would be realized. I didn't get that right away. And, there was a couple of spectacular failures that caused me no loss of life or anything, but things didn't get done that should have gotten done. And when I look back in the mirror, I realized it was purely on me. I didn't do any of those leadership things that I should have. And consequently, I didn't set my people up for success, and we failed. Not spectacularly, not, as I say, loss of life spectacular, but, things that could have, should have gotten done didn't. So I really emphasize to young leaders, servant leadership. Your job as the leader is to remove barriers to make your people successful. Set the conditions so that they can accomplish the mission that you've made clear to them. They understand what it is, where we're going, and then you help pave the way and remove roadblocks so they can be successful. And that's a lesson I carried forward all the way, through my career. That was my major job, was to look for the barriers, enable success of the people that are working so hard to try and do it.
That's a great lesson. It's certainly one that's better off learned in your junior officer tour rather than later on.
That stupid Ensign Busby, there he goes again. tripping over his feet again.
As we mentioned just briefly ago, you served numerous vessels, of course, throughout your career, the pinnacle of which came as your commanding officer tour aboard USS Carney, DDG 64. Of course, as we mentioned, Admiral Carney is talked about on the daily here at the battleship, and as Admiral Halsey's Third Fleet Chief of Staff in the South Pacific in World War II. And actually, Admiral Carney's stateroom is still preserved today on the O2 level, with some nice mannequins of him and Admiral Halsey, and some really great information about Admiral Carney. What was it like? I mean, not only having a command of your own, but having a command of a ship with a namesake and a lineage such as Admiral Carney, of course, later went on to be CNO in his own right, and went on to have a really career-shaping career of our naval force.
Well, it was the thrill of my life. You accurately portrayed it. I could have stopped my career right there, having commanded Carney and declared success and been a happy camper. I have stayed in touch with COs since then, spoke with the CNO or with the commanding officer of the ship when they were in the Red Sea shooting down all of the Houthi missiles a few years ago. I said, I volunteer to come back. I'll be a mess cook for you. No problem. I'll be a scullery queen. I'll wash dishes all day just to be part of your crew. Again, proud Carney destroyerman. But, and getting Carney was just extra special because of the connection with Uncle Joel. But a real thrill on my way to command as I got to meet Betty Carney Taussig, the Admiral's daughter, who was the ship's sponsor.
Okay.
Who was just a wonderful lady. I mean, she knew Uncle Joel. She had met him.
Oh, wow. Okay.
As a young girl.
That's great.
Her husband, Joe Taussig, of course, famous, naval hero, son of Admiral Taussig, who was as Ensign Taussig aboard Nevada on December 7th, lost a leg during the attack, transitioned over to becoming a Navy lawyer and stumped his way across the Pacific, with a peg leg, and went on to continue to serve the Navy, but full of sea stories, wonderful, wonderful couple. Couldn't be more generous to the ship and to the crew. Betty would send hundreds of pounds of candy out to the ship every Christmas, and then also to the families back home port and Mayport. She was awesome. She was just so amazing. And every year on her birthday, we would send her about 20 dozen roses. I mean, it was ridiculous, but we loved her. She loved the ship. It was just a wonderful relationship that we had together, and a real privilege. That really put the icing on the cake for, commanding Carney. The other kind of neat part of that was in Desron 14 at the time, down in Mayport. Another ship that was also in Desron 14 was the USS Boone, FFG 28. And the commanding officer of that ship was a good friend of mine. And we, knew the relationship of our two namesakes. And we ended up deploying together to the Med as part of George Washington Battle Group under then Rear Admiral Mullen. So and every time I would see the Boone, coming nearby, I'd always tell the signalman to flash over, "Hi, Uncle Joel." And they would always flash back, "Hi, Buzz." So it got to be kind of a thing during that deployment. But it was, the crews got involved with it and thought it was really funny.
That's awesome. I love that story. You later went on.
And to put the final piece on that,
please.
Both of us had our changes of command, both Boone and Carney, on the same day, and we parked the ships bow to bow.
Oh, that's awesome.
I did my change of command at 0800, and I went over and was the guest speaker at their change of command at 11. So it was pretty fun.
That's a great story. Great coincidence. You later went on to assume command of Destroyer Squadron 31 as the Sea Combat Commander for the Abraham Lincoln Battle Group during 2 deployments in support of operations in Iraq and Afghanistan. Can you talk to us a little bit about your experience in that role and sort of the day-to-day of commanding, multiple ships, supporting troops in combat in theater?
Yeah. Well, the Desron job really has 2 parts to it. There's in those days, at least anyway, you had the kind of administrative part where you were there to kind of provide leadership and guidance and remove barriers for the COs of all of your ships. I had 7 ships in my squadron. So, they were running their ships, but when they ran into a problem with the shipyard or getting a part or something like that, I told my staff, we have to have the mindset of what are we going to do for our ships, not what are we going to do to our ships. A lot of destroyer squadrons had over the years developed reputation that they were the bad guys coming on board to find something wrong or whatever. And I said, we're there to help our ships be successful, to be as battle ready as they possibly could. So there was that piece of it while we were in home port. When we were deployed, the Desron rode the carrier, and I was the sea combat commander, which means I owned all the ASW warfare, all the anti-surface warfare, all of the boardings that we were doing at that time of sanction violators. Any of that operation kind of came under my purview. And in essence, I was the deputy battle group commander for most things, but I worked with the carrier CO, I worked with the CAG, I worked with the cruiser CO, who was the air warfare commander. So there was this triumvirate of about 5 of us 6s were the warfighters for the Admiral. And luckily we all got along really, really well. And I think we had a pretty tight leadership organization. And consequently, we got our mission done pretty well and didn't hurt anybody and got a lot of things accomplished.
That's great. You went on to serve as the CO of the Surface Warfare Officer School, SWO School. Our last guest, we had Rear Admiral Michael York, who was previously commanding of the Navy Supply School. So I asked you a similar question that I asked him, and that, what was your experience like sort of training the next generation of naval line officers?
That was a very fulfilling billet. I was asked to go there. I finished up my Desron time, and I was out at Pearl Harbor, kind of figuring out where I was going to go next. And I made a real strong bid to go up to Newport to be CO of SWAS. I had been through every course SWAS offered on my way through the various steps, and I really enjoyed the teaching role, and I still do. But the ability to kind of have an influence and to raise our young, essentially, to give them the boost and the knowledge and, break down barriers for them, help them ensure success, just, more of that same sort of servant leadership kind of thing. Here was an opportunity to influence every officer that was going back to sea, came through my schoolhouse from ensign all the way up through major command. And I had some wonderful people working there with me, but I got to be the mentor to a large degree, to the commanding officers and the major commanders. And I could share with them my successes and mostly my failures so that they could avoid them and be even more successful. Because that was, that's what it was all about, was, making our Navy even stronger by having the good leadership out there. And during my time there, we brought on a whole new big simulator suite of ship bridge simulators, which we hadn't had before, we had gone out into town and used commercial facilities, but now we brought them in-house and, at the latest generation, and got some really good. I wanted to have not just a ship handling simulator, but a tactics simulator to do, weapons, firings, and that kind of stuff, to practice some of the tactics that we were going to need to know how to do. So it was all very satisfying. I really enjoyed that time up in Newport. I love Newport anyway, so any excuse to get back up there. It was my 7th tour up there. Really, I loved it. It was great. Now, the wife wasn't too excited about leaving Honolulu and going up to Newport in April in the middle of a sleet storm. I heard about that a little bit, but
I can imagine.
She got used to it.
Your uniform career culminated in being named the 23rd Commanding Officer of Military Sealift Command. Military Sealift Command, of course, operates the U.S. Navy's non-combatant ships that provides logistics, sustainment, and specialized support to the fleet worldwide. MSC delivers fuel, ammunition, food, and equipment and supplies at sea and ashore, enabling naval and joint forces to stay deployed and in the fight without returning to a port. It also conducts strategic sealift and supports humanitarian assistance, disaster relief, and special missions. MSC's civilian mariners and Navy personnel ensure global mobility and maritime logistics for the Department of Defense. Now, of course, that's the textbook definition of what MSC does, but I sort of love to hear it in your own words and, MSC's importance to, continuing our naval power around the world.
Yeah. Well, it was kind of ironic that I graduated from the U.S. Merchant Marine Academies. All that time, 30 years on the pointy end of the Navy, shooting and gunning and that kind of stuff, and ended up back into the logistics part, the Merchant Marine part of the Navy. I used to tell people I own every ship that doesn't go bang or whoosh. Everything else, I own it. And it was about 120 some ships spanning a wide range of missions, and typically all with civilian Merchant Marine personnel, both government employees and contracted mariners. So it was a wide range, a wide variety of ships, different manning models in the Navy, and doing missions largely unknown to the uniformed Navy.
Right.
I mean, we pretty much all knew the ships that were on the other end of the span wire, the oilers and the ammo ships and the dry cargo ships. Got it. About them. But all of the sealift ships, oceanographic research ships, the towing and salvage ships, I mean, it just goes on and on and on. The different, eaches and oars that goes on, and again, the way it's structured more like a shipping company, a business, and that we have our contracting authorities are a lot broader and easier than the regular Navy. So we could get things done very quickly. We weren't as hogtied by red tape as regular Navy procurement is. We could get stuff turned on a dime and moving in the right direction. And typically we had an expert in the organization that knew how to do whatever it is we needed to go do. So consequently, we had a really broad range of missions and things to do. And for me, it was great because as a two-star, typically 2-stars don't go to sea and you're kind of riding a desk. So with 120 ships, I made it my goal to get on every single one of them. There was only 3. They were very wily. They were able to avoid me. But I set foot on steel deck of every single one of them, including a fair amount of them underway. And whenever I came aboard, they always offered me the con. And of course, I never turned it down because driving a ship's driving a ship. And that was fun. So I got a nice kick at the very end of my career doing stuff that I loved with sailors that don't get their recognition, but gosh, they do such tremendous work.
Yeah. I mentioned earlier our conversation with Admiral York, who is currently the CEO of NAVSUP WSS, and we talked about keeping the fleet supplied and even tracking down individual parts for forward deployed ships. We had an awesome conversation with Admiral Tucker, our last skipper, about the art of underway replenishment. We had a really great conversation with Joe Benton, a fellow Kings Pointer who you met down at the dry dock, about ship handling and the SSO force. And actually, Joe was promoted to captain just a couple of weeks ago right here on the Battleship.
Very proud of Joe.
And 2 episodes ago, we spoke to Philip Brashear, who's got a rack picked out on his dad's namesake ship, the USNS Carl Brashear, the AKE 7. And I mention these because we've had some really great conversations about, the non-pointy end of the Navy, as you so eloquently said. And I think the folks, if you've listened to all these conversations, sort of have a better understanding today than they would have of, the greater Navy in, maritime industry. And so to sort of bring all those conversations together, how do you think that MSC sort of enables deterrence before a conflict ever begins?
Yeah. So we're a presence, a global presence with 120 ships around. We get seen probably, our 120 ships are almost on par with the entire rest of the U.S. commercial merchant marine, which is only about 200 ships or so that sail deep sea. So there is that, the fact that we're exercising logistics trains on a regular basis, both sailing from CONUS out to the fleet and foreign based logistics, like running out of Djibouti, running out of Bahrain, running out of Djibouti, running out of Singapore. Having all those established logistics heads and logistics nodes are going to be really critical when it comes time to, when the dust up ultimately occurs, and we have to, support a fleet that's very far forward, that's on the end of a very long logistics chain. We're well practiced. We would like to have more assets because they are going to be, quite frankly, high priority targets for the bad guys. You take away our logistics, a carrier battle group is going to be Winchester, meaning out of bullets and out of fuel in about 5 to 7 days. So without sustainment, moving things forward and sustaining that battle group, they're going to become combat ineffective pretty damn quick. And I testified before Congress a bunch of times and tried to make that point very clearly, that as mighty as our Navy is, and God bless it, it is, and it's wonderful, but it's got a finite amount of holes from which things come out of. And when they're gone, and when you've classified datums with torpedoes and, you're blowing stuff up and steaming around at 30 knots, you're going to go through a lot of everything quick.
Yeah.
And that's, MSC is going to be the one that resupplies and sustains, not just the combat logistics force, the people that are on the other end of the span wire, but the Sealift ships. They're going to be hauling the bulk stuff forward that the Sealift can then load and take alongside. So it all has to work together, including the commercial merchant marine. They are a major part of this thing, which is, the piece of it that I worked on when I was at MARAD was making sure that was in place and strong enough to support. So
Yeah.
I was really lucky in that I got to be on kind of both pieces of the at-sea logistics chain and have, at least some influence on it.
Yeah. Of course, the battleship was on station off the coast of Lebanon for over 170 straight days without hitting a port. And I can tell you, the sailors here from that time certainly appreciated a good underway of replenishment.
I'm sure. And that was the strength of the combat logistics force, able to keep that ship at sea for that amount of time.
Operating engineers are the men and women that move mountains. And the Engineers Labor Employer Cooperative, ELEC, puts them to work. They create opportunities for the men, women, and union signatory contractors of Local 825, repaving our roads, keeping our homes bright and warm, and even building our favorite team stadium. We understand infrastructure. That's why ELEC and Local 825 are ready to get to work.
We talked about it earlier a little bit, but MSC operates, I would say, some of the least glamorous ships in the Navy, but probably the most vital. There's certain platforms or classes of MSC ships do you think probably deserve a little bit more recognition out there in the world than maybe they get today? Of course, I have my USNS Brashear hat, and but anything in particular like that you think should be a priority going forward?
The oilers and the TAKEs, they're really the backbone of combat logistics force, and those are the most well known. Those are the ones that the fleet sees the most often, and that's where most of the stuff, be either fuel, ammo, or dry cargo is going to come from. Those two ships primarily. So we see them a lot, and we got the TAKEs are relatively new. We launched a bunch of them while I was at MSC, and we got the new oilers, John Lewis class oilers coming online here now that are fabulous ships. I helped in the design of those while I was there also, but great ships to relieve the Kaisers who have given us yeoman service over the years, but are just getting worn out. But I would say, kind of my favorite ship while I was there at MSC were the fleet tugs, the Swiss Army knives. They have so much capability. They have towing capability. They can support, diving, salvage, beach gear. I mean, then and it's a small crew. It's a tough little ship.
Yeah.
It was just neat to be on board of them. And they were building a whole new class of them as well, because they were getting pretty old. Yeah, they were cool ships. I loved, because it's real seamanship there. I mean, it's
certainly
big pieces of what they call jewelry, which are big snatch blocks and the beaching gear and all that kind of stuff. And a lot of things that could hurt you if you let them, but they could also perform some magnificent missions. So yeah, those were kind of fun ships.
You mentioned testifying to Congress earlier. Of course, as MSC commander, you oversaw over 10,000 uniformed and civilian personnel, a $3.5 billion budget, a few more billions as MARAD administrator. What do you think policymakers should better understand, and really the greater public who's interested in the military and certainly the Navy? What should policymakers and the public better understand about Sealift and logistics and the way that we're operating and refueling and resustaining the fleet?
Yeah. So I got to testify 7 different times up on the Hill. Always a fun day. But as I got more comfortable going up there, I saw it as a great opportunity to educate Congress. And by and large, they were interested to understand what was going on. And our Sealift capacity and fleet is in kind of poor shape. While I was there at MARAD, we exercised the Ready Reserve Force at that time were 46 ships that were maintained in 5-day readiness that were comprised a good portion of our Sealift capacity. Military Sealift Command had, I think, 10 or 12 large medium speed roll-on roll-off ships that were part of the Sealift capacity as well. Every year we do a test. We break out It's called turbo activation. We'll break out 2 or 3 of them just to make sure they can meet the 5-day timeline from bell ringing to being ready for sea. One year we decided to do a big breakout. And the final numbers were pretty scary. 46% of the ships were fully ready to go. And that's not good.
Yeah.
When we're counting, when our war plans and everything else are counting on all of that tonnage being available to make multiple runs to sustain, when right out the gate, 46% was not combat ready, not able to even get underway, let alone handle cargo. We didn't test that part of it. This was turn the key, get the engines running, and steam out of port within a 5-day period. And we weren't even making that. So beating the drum to try and get people to recognize we need to make investment in renewing these ships, revitalizing and repairing the ones that are repairable, and getting rid of the old tonnage and getting new ships in was just going to be vital. It's not sexy. It's not front page. It's not a Trump class battleship. It's not flashy, but you know what? It's going to make or break whether, when we go do something, whether we're going to be able to do it for very long or not. Because without the sealift, without the sustainment, as I said, about a week's worth, and we're going to be out of Schlitz.
Well, of course, just looking to the future, you've just been mentioning it, the focus on shipbuilding, which has been the focus today. And of course, rightfully so. We don't have enough shipyards. We don't have enough shipyard workers. We don't have enough dry docks for commissioned vessels, and we can't build them fast enough. But as we continue to keep that focus where it should be on, building and overhauling ships for the Navy, the Coast Guard, Merchant Marine, you mentioned NOAA. We also need more qualified officers manning the bridge of these ships. You went to Kings Point. In addition to Kings Point, there are 6 state maritime academies. Unfortunately, New Jersey is not one of them. Perhaps we need to have a conversation with Lieutenant Mikey Sherrill, USN retired, our new governor, about that.
Who was on my board of visitors at Kings Point while I was there.
That right?
She was.
Okay.
She was awesome. Big supporter.
Awesome. That's good to know. She just visited us a couple of weeks ago during Navy's 250th birthday. So I'm looking forward to welcoming her back on board soon. But in July of last year, you co-wrote what I thought was a great way forward in an essay in the Naval Institute's proceedings entitled "A Modern Maritime Service Can Deliver What the Nation Needs." And we'll put a link in the description of the episode to that. So I'm curious, what message you have to young mariners, one of those 7 Maritime Academy students who are considering service as an SSO, a strategic sealift officer, or you're just heading out to sea with an MSC ship, a MARAD ship. What do young people today who are considering a career in one of our sea services, but more specifically for MSC or MARAD, what could be helpful information for them to know, or might helpful information as someone who's considering a career such as you've had?
Yeah, I would say, going to sea, and obviously I'm biased because I decided early on that's what I was going to do, and ended up loving every minute of it. It's definitely not for everybody. It's not a job. It's a lifestyle. You have to kind of go in
absolutely
understanding that. It's, it's different than any old land job. You're not going to be probably coming home to your family every night. There's probably going to be about 6 months of the year, typically, where you're going to be away. Connectivity has gotten so much better nowadays. You still stay in touch. It used to be the occasional letter,
right?
Snail mail. Now, just about all ships have Starlink or some way to connect on a pretty regular basis. So that's not as bad as it used to be. But you're away. There's family separation. That has long been the big dissatisfier, both in the Navy and the Merchant Marine, is the impact on family life. But, the rewards are many. It's quite an adventurous life. You're going out and being in nature. You're doing different missions all the time. And here I'm talking specifically MSC. Coming out of the academy, or one of the state maritime academies, as a third mate, $156,000 a year, plus up to $58,000 in bonuses. That's real money.
That's real money.
That's real money.
Especially for an 18, 21-year-old who's coming out of for a first job.
For 6 months of work.
Yeah.
That's not bad. That's not bad. That's something to think about. Are you going to work? Yeah, you're going to work hard, but you're going to be supporting the security of our nation. And here I'm talking about the commercial merchant marine too, because virtually the entirety of our commercial merchant marine, the deep sea portion of it, figures into our national security and the sealift posture. You may day to day be doing a route from here to Dubai, also typically part of the maritime security program, those ships, which when called upon are going to be doing military missions. So pretty much you come out of an academy, Kings Point or one of the 6 SMAs, you're ultimately working for the government in one way, shape, or form. Ultimately, it's there is the satisfaction of doing that, of giving back something to your country, whether you're commercial or not. But as I said, it's a lifestyle. It's not for everybody. Some people make a career out of it and love it. You can advance pretty quickly up to a very senior rating pretty damn fast. I mean, there are people that are class of 2018, 2017 that are getting ready to sit for their master's licenses right now.
Wow.
Because they've sailed steadily. And you need 360 days a year, 360 days on your license to sit for your next license. And there are people that are doing that. And there's some very young captains and chief engineers out there because they've decided that's for them. They've adjusted their lifestyle so they have that work-life balance, and they are stashing away a lot of cash in the process.
Yeah, absolutely. Wanted to ask a question about your time at MARAD. Of course, as the administrator, you operate as sort of the intersection of policy, the maritime industry, of course, our national security. Just curious, is there anything that really, you obviously had tremendous experience at MSC and throughout your time in the Navy, but is there anything that really sort of surprised you about, taking on that role?
I'd worked closely with MARAD while I was at MSC, and obviously MARAD is in charge of the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy, so I knew of them from, my time there. But once I got in the job and began trying to figure out how to grow the Merchant Marine and make sure it's the vibrancy of our mission and the Ready Reserve Force and Kings Point, quite frankly, make sure it was doing what it needed to do. The pushback and the headwinds that I encountered from other parts of the government surprised me a lot. At that time, we're talking 2017, 2021, first Trump administration, there were not a lot of fans of the Merchant Marine. There was not a lot of desire to make any kind of investments that would enlarge the Merchant Marine. And this is across government, and I make a very big generalization here, but shipping industry and ship owners are often looked at as kind of big fat cats. Why should the government be contributing anything to them? They're out there running these big ships, making this big money.
Right.
Maritime industry operates on a very narrow margin with huge capital investments.
Right.
So it's not all quite as it would seem. And quite frankly, when our government has not made investments in the Merchant Marine,
right,
we've ended up kind of where we are now.
Right.
It's gone peaks and valleys throughout our history.
And do you attribute that in any way to sort of just a more generalized lack of understanding about what it is?
I do.
Yeah.
Out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Aircraft and trucks and, and
it's not the sexy ships.
They're very visible. We interface with all those other forms of transportation. Ships are in terminals way behind fences and in places where people don't typically go, with the exception of like a cruise ship. And that's just, these days, an amusement park at sea,
basically
doesn't even look like a ship anymore.
Yeah.
But so the industry suffers from that, I think, a lot. So just difficult. I spent most of my time as the administrator trying to help educate people. And I talked to anybody that would be willing to listen about the importance of the Merchant Marine and what it really is and what it isn't. It's not a bunch of thugs with dirty T-shirts, that are walking around with cargo hooks, beating the hell out of each other.
Right.
It's, still a popular misconception.
That's part of the reason I wanted to have this conversation, because I think it is, I'm a civilian. I was in the Navy, but just being around the Navy and being around personnel so much in this job here at the Battleship, I was surprised about my own lack of knowledge on the subject, and I've been trying to learn and educate in the same way. So I'm glad we could have this conversation.
Yeah, and I appreciate the venue to try and get some more word out.
Absolutely. We first met when you came to see us at dry dock number 3 in 2024. Somehow we're coming up on the 2-year anniversary of taking the ship to dry dock, which I just cannot believe.
Hard to believe.
4th time that the battleship returned to that same dry dock. Of course, we were the last ship of the former Philadelphia Ship Repair, the parent company, North Atlantic Ship Repair, which you served on the board of directors of. Did you have a favorite moment from visiting the battleship in the dry dock?
I think just standing all the way at the stem, right at the forefoot of the ship, and looking up at that razor sharp bow blossoming out into that beautiful bulbous nose there up where the twin 40s used to sit. A real thrill. You know, as a young kid growing up, I followed the reactivation back in 1968. I still have an album with all the newspaper clippings and pictures and stuff, and just, you know, wanted to serve on a battleship in the worst way. You know, I thought that would be the coolest thing in the world to do. I got to serve on one, just didn't work out in my career, but got to sail with Iowa, did a couple cruises down in Central America with her. I have a Holy Stone that I got, a genuine Holy Stone.
There you go.
But yeah, I think that was probably the biggest thrill, was just to stand in that dry dock and look at that. I have a couple of photographs that I took of it. But, you know, it was a real privilege to be able to do that. And thank you to you and Ryan for for hosting us that day. Of course, I was there under the guise of being one of the former directors of the year. It was a great thrill, and not something I ever wanted to pass up. So glad we got a chance to do it.
Yeah. Well, my next question, and I think I know the answer to that, was going to be: were you keeping track of New Jersey, being from the state, throughout your time in the Navy? And it sounds like the answer to that is certainly yes.
Absolutely. As I said, I collected everything I could about the New Jersey. You know, newspaper clippings. I have copies of Dreadnought Returns and Dreadnought Farewell, books that were Neil Leifer had done back during the time, and of course when the Reagan Navy buildup occurred, and so the battleships are coming back. It was exciting. It was exciting to see.
I'm curious, from your perspective, how can, just sticking on the battleship for a moment, how do you think institutions like the Battleship New Jersey can sort of help connect past service with future generations?
Yeah, I think it's really important. I mean, for young, impressionable people to kind of get a taste, even though it may not be the most modern thing, it's representative of service and sacrifice and being a part of something bigger than just themselves. I mean, literally, my first naval vessel that I was ever exposed to was in Atlantic City, the Naval Reserve Center there. They had one of my neighbors was lieutenant commander in the reserves, was CEO of the USS Lennox. USS Lennox was a Korean War vintage wooden coastal minesweeper.
Wow, wooden ship. Okay, wow.
An old wooden ship, painted gray. It was on its last legs. They said, "Here, give it to the reservists. They'll do something with it." But I walked aboard that thing as a, 8, 9-year-old. I thought I was walking onto a battleship. I mean, it was,
I'm sure
it had the ship smell to it. It was gray. It was big. There was sailors walking around. It was, it just made an impression. And I look back on that ship and kind of chuckle now. It was all of probably about 140 feet.
Right.
But it was.
Might as well have been a battleship to a 9-year-old. Yeah.
Seeing the museum ships, especially the battleships that are, have the beautiful sheer and the beautiful lines, and they're just appealing to look at. They project strength, our nation. I think I think they serve a very big purpose. And a shout out to Ryan, the series that he does chronicling individual details about that ship, I think are so important for the future. This is a wonderful historical record that will be there for posterity that,
absolutely,
to my knowledge, none of the other museum ships have done to this extent in this platform. And it's going to be a real service, I think, even more so in the future. So
yeah,
I'm sure it's, it's time consuming, but it's really, I've learned lots of stuff that I thought I knew a lot about battleships, but I've learned quite a bit watching.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that greatly. I think as the conversation sort of continues to unfold publicly, that you mentioned earlier, the president has, talked about a new class of ship, the Trump class battleship, EBG. And the topic is always, well, why don't we just bring the Iowa classes back? Why don't we put the New Jersey back in service? But, as you just talked about, and as Ryan sort of hints on a nightly basis, is the people who understand these systems, the people who learned it and who've taught it, they're not around anymore.
Yeah.
People who make the armament are not around anymore. All these different things.
Training is gone.
Exactly.
So
we are doing that. We are trying to preserve that history for the future, not to reactivate the battleship necessarily, but although I know some people would love to see that, but for posterity, I think, and for future generations, especially when it comes to getting farther and farther out from World War II. And of course, we only have a few World War II.
And it shows what this nation is capable of doing.
Absolutely.
To build a magnificent vessel like that could go off and do the missions that our country was asked of it and do so successfully.
I wanted to ask two more things before we wrap up, and that's first to start with a quick lightning round. And I'm going to list off a couple questions and just give me the first thing that comes to the top of your head. Most memorable deployment?
Probably my Carney deployment in command.
Favorite Navy ship of all time?
Well, obviously, Carney would probably be right up to the top there, but outside of the Carney, I would probably have to say probably New Jersey. Yeah, you're right up there.
You have a favorite class of ship to serve on?
I really enjoyed the Ticonderoga class cruiser. I was the second weapons officer on the Yorktown, the second ship, back when Aegis was brand new. And then I put the Shiloh in commission as their XO. So I knew those ships pretty well. Lots of capability, lots of firepower, and really fun to handle. If
there was one person in Navy history you could have dinner with here in the captain's cabin where I'm sitting here on the battleship, who would it be?
This one may surprise you, but I think Miles Browning, who was the CO, I think, of the Yorktown, if I'm not mistaken, who was known as a real tyrant, a real martinet. I'd like to get in his head a little bit. See.
All right. I like that.
What was making him tick.
Do you have a favorite naval battle in history?
Well, as a destroyer, I'm going to have to say the Battle off Samar. I mean, that just stirs my heart.
Yeah.
Just thinking about it. And
absolutely.
I routinely think, and I thought a lot in command, would I have had the guts of, the COs of all of those ships to turn and race into the fire that they had to take and do that. Ernest Evans, what a magnificent commanding officer.
If you didn't spend your career in the Navy, what do you think you'd be doing?
Probably in the Coast Guard or the Merchant Marine. I'd be going to sea it still.
So you'd be on the water somewhere. It doesn't matter.
I might be a clam digger in South Jersey, who knows? But I'd be on the water for sure.
And finally, of course, this is the Wetsu podcast. As you already know, it stands for We Eat This Stuff Up. And it's a reminder that when things get tough, when you're cold, when you're tired, when you're under pressure, there's sort of pride in leading into the challenge and doing it with a smile on your face. Of course, that was the last motto of our captain, Admiral Ron Tucker, and the crew. It's mentioned behind me on a replica of our battle flag, our last battle flag, and inspired this podcast. Is there a particular Wetsu moment that comes to mind from your career, from your time in the Navy?
Yeah, I think it was probably one of the most satisfying moments, is I guess the way I would do it, that probably qualifies as a Wetsu moment. It's back aboard Carney. We're deployed 1997. It's Christmas Eve. We are underway in the northern Persian Gulf. We had been tasked with escorting a vessel that had violated sanctions that were in place at that time against Iraq. This was a dhow, a big 100-foot dhow that was carrying dates, of all things. Wasn't even carrying anything, like guns or anything else. It was carrying dates. It had been seized and boarded and determined to, have this illicit cargo. So we were told to escort this ship from the Northern Arabian Gulf down to the Southern Gulf and hand it off to another ship. So this is Christmas Eve, steaming along at 8 knots. We're maybe 200 yards off of the starboard quarter of this vessel, escorting it. In those days, 1997, it was kind of the infancy of connectivity. And the battle group had this thing called sailor phone. And it was basically a regular handheld telephone, like a telephone booth used to have. And we had an antenna, big radome, that was mounted on the forward end of our forward funnel, which on an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer, the main mast slants aft, and the funnel is right behind it, kind of in the shadow. And the way that where the satellite was placed was to the south of us. So our mast was shadowing that antenna. And in those days, there was not enough bandwidth for all the ships in the battle group to be on sailorphone at the same time. So we were all given 4-hour blocks.
Wow.
My 4-hour block was from 1600 to 2000 that afternoon. Well, we're heading south at 8 knots with our antenna blanked. So we were not going to be able to do calls to home on Christmas Eve. So this is going to suck. This is going to trash morale. So I'm standing on the bridge wing. My electronics people come up and said, "Sarah, we can't get a signal." We tried veering off course, 20, 30 degrees. It wasn't enough. One of my officers standing out there on the bridge wing when we said, "Oh, it's too bad we can't turn the ship around and go backwards." I looked at him and said, "Of course we can. This is a DDG. We can do anything. And I'm the captain. I can do anything." So we quick spun the ship around 180 degrees, and I could go 15 knots astern on a DDG. I could go faster astern, and he could go ahead. So we ended up turning the ship around and backing at 8 knots, escorting this ship down on Christmas Eve. Sailorphone was working like a champ. The helmsmen and conning officers were having the time of their lives maintaining course, going backwards. The engineers were coming up on deck and going back to the fantail because we were throwing spray and water up. They thought this was the greatest thing they had ever seen.
I hope there's some pictures of this somewhere.
Well, it gets better. And I had a steady parade of sailors coming up to the bridge wing saying, "My mama told me to come up here and say thank you to you for making this happen," because it was a big thing. So I figured, this is cool, but, the leaderships probably wouldn't think a whole lot this was such a good idea because it's a little, out of the box. Well, I'm feeling
Better ask for forgiveness and permission.
I'm feeling pretty good till I see an F-3 Viking come flying down my side from the carrier. George Washington's operating to the south of us. He goes by, and then he comes down my other side, and then he comes around again, and I turned to my XOs up there, and I said, "Oh, we're in trouble now." Sure enough, about an hour later, I get a call on a Navy red phone from the Chief of Staff. "Admiral wants to talk to you." This is Admiral Mike Mullen, later CNO, later Joint Chiefs.
Yes, of course.
He goes, "Buzz, how's things on the Carney today?" I said, "Sir, we're having a great time. We're escorting a sanctions violator. It's Christmas Eve. Sailorphone's working great. Everything's good." He said, "Yeah, I'm looking at a picture here." I said, "Yes, sir. Looks like you're going the wrong direction. What the hell's going on down there?" Explained to him why we were doing it and that we were accomplishing our mission. We had good cover. We were escorting them at 8 knots, and all was well on a good ship Carney. And he laughed and said, "Merry Christmas." That was something that has stuck with me all these years. And I still get emails from some of my sailors around Christmas time reminding me of that day. But that was a lot of fun.
That's awesome. That's a great story. And I think absolutely qualifies as a Wetsu moment.
Yeah,
for sure. And I think that's a great place to wrap this up. Admiral Buz Buzby, thank you so much for joining us on Wetsu, for sharing your story, your leadership, your lifelong commitment to our maritime service, and of course, our national security. And to our listeners, thank you very much for tuning in to another episode of Wetsu. This is a Battleship New Jersey podcast. Emma Hermo is our producer. If you enjoyed today's conversation, be sure to subscribe, share, and most importantly, come visit us aboard the most decorated battleship in U.S. Navy history right here in the great state of New Jersey. Until next time, thank you very much for joining us on Wetsu.
You bet. Good seeing you. Take care.
Thank you, sir.
Operating engineers are the men and women that move mountains. And the Engineers Labor Employer Cooperative, ELEC, puts them to work. They create opportunities for the men, women, and union signatory contractors of Local 825. Repaving our roads, keeping our homes bright and warm, and even building our favorite team stadium. We understand infrastructure. That's why ELEC and Local 825 are ready to get to work.